The number 29 jersey was waiting before Tarik Skubal walked through the door. That detail matters more than it might seem. Jerseys don't wait for players who arrive as afterthoughts, as depth additions or insurance policies or the kind of signing that gets announced on a Tuesday afternoon and forgotten by Thursday. Jerseys wait for players whose arrival has been anticipated, prepared for, built toward over weeks of negotiation and organizational deliberation and the specific kind of careful planning that precedes a commitment of this magnitude. 5 years. That is what the Dodgers gave Tarik Skubal. 5 years of certainty in a sport that offers certainty to almost no one, not as a gesture, not as an opening position in a negotiation that would eventually settle somewhere shorter, but as the genuine, front office approved expression of what this organization believes Skubal represents to its future. Dave Roberts handed him that jersey personally. Number 29. And the moment it passed from one set of hands to another, 2 other stories, quieter, heavier, carrying the specific weight that departures always carry, were already being written in a different part of the building. The Dodgers GM had made his decisions. All of them. On the same day. And the distance between what those decisions meant for the players arriving and what they meant for the players leaving was the kind of distance that only exists inside professional sports, vast, and crossed in a single afternoon, without ceremony and without the time to fully process what has changed until long after the processing would have been useful. 2 players were gone before most people outside the organization knew they were leaving. That is how these things happen at the highest level of baseball. Not with the dramatic, public unraveling that fans sometimes imagine accompanies roster decisions of consequence. But with a meeting, a conversation, the specific language that professional sports uses to communicate things that are difficult to say plainly, demoted, released, no longer part of the plan, and then the quiet that follows when the meeting ends and the player walks back to his locker with a different understanding of his immediate future than he arrived with. The Dodgers GM did not make these decisions carelessly. That is the first thing worth understanding about an organization that operates with the deliberateness that this one has demonstrated across years of roster construction. Every move is connected to other moves. Every departure creates space that the organization has already identified a use for. The 2 players who left on the same day that Skubal arrived did not leave because of a coincidence in timing. They left because the arrival required the space. And the arrival was worth the space. What made the departures heavy, what gave them a weight beyond the ordinary transaction of professional sports, was the specific context surrounding one of them. Because one of those players hadn't just underperformed in the ways that players underperform when the gap between expectation and production becomes too wide for an organization to continue bridging with patience. One of them had done something that went beyond baseball. Alfonzo's name entered this story through a base-running blunder so consequential that the people who watched it happen in real time were still processing its full implications several innings after the play concluded. It was not a close call. It was not the kind of mistake that falls into the complicated middle ground where execution and judgment and the impossible speed of in-game decision-making combine to produce an outcome that reasonable people can evaluate differently. It was the kind of mistake that announces itself, that produces, in the dugout and in the stands and in every room where baseball people watched it unfold, the specific, sinking recognition of a play that has just handed something away that didn't need to be handed away. The Dodgers lost something in that moment. Not just the run. Not just the inning. But the specific, fragile momentum that late-game baseball runs on, the belief, shared between players and coaching staff and the crowd behind them, that the team is capable of executing when execution is what the situation demands. Alfonzo broke that belief with one decision on the base paths. What happened after was worse. Because Alfonzo, confronted with what his mistake had cost, did not do what the situation called for. He did not accept responsibility in the direct, professional way that accountability in a clubhouse requires. He deflected. He found another direction to point, and the direction he chose, in the specific way he chose it, carried implications that extended far beyond the base-running error that started everything. He pointed toward Ohtani. The nature of what Alfonzo said, and what he did, in the dangerous, boundary-crossing way that made the behavior something other than mere deflection, became known inside the Dodgers organization before it became known anywhere else. These things travel through a clubhouse in the specific, accelerated way that things travel through enclosed spaces where everyone knows everyone and the walls between what is said privately and what becomes collectively understood are thinner than outsiders assume. Roberts heard it. The GM heard it. And what they heard was not the frustration of a player processing a mistake in the imperfect, human way that baseball players process mistakes, with language that is too strong and emotion that hasn't yet found its proper proportion. What they heard was something more deliberate than frustration. More targeted. More concerning in the way that targeted behavior toward a specific teammate is always concerning when it crosses the line between competitive friction and something that requires an organizational response. Ohtani was the target. Again. In a different way than he has been targeted from outside the organization, not by opposing players or rival franchises or the public provocations of men who resent what he represents. From inside. From a teammate. From someone who had shared a clubhouse with him and had chosen, in the aftermath of his own failure, to make Ohtani the direction his anger traveled. The GM made his decision quickly after that. Not impulsively, there is nothing impulsive about the way this organization operates. But with the speed that genuine clarity produces when the situation stops being ambiguous. Alfonzo was gone before the next day's lineup was posted. Tarik Skubal walked into a building where all of this had just happened. Where 2 lockers had been cleared and the specific absence that cleared lockers produce, not the visible absence of things removed but the invisible absence of the people who occupied the space, was still present in the air of a clubhouse that had absorbed a significant amount in a short period of time. He walked in anyway. With the specific, settled confidence of a man who has earned his way to this moment through years of work that did not always go the way work is supposed to go, through a recovery that required patience and the particular courage that comes from rebuilding something after it has been broken and not knowing, during the rebuilding, whether what emerges will be the same thing or something diminished. What emerged was not diminished. The Skubal who signed a 5-year contract with the Dodgers was not the prospect version of himself, full of ceiling and short on proof. He was the demonstrated version, the pitcher whose results had accumulated into a body of evidence compelling enough that one of the most analytically sophisticated organizations in professional baseball looked at it and decided that 5 years was the right number. Not 3. Not 4. 5. Roberts handed him the jersey with the expression of a manager who had wanted this acquisition for long enough that the reality of it arriving had not fully settled yet. Number 29. Held out with both hands. Accepted with the quiet acknowledgement of a man who understood what the number represented and what the organization handing it to him expected. The room felt different after that exchange. Not lighter, exactly, too much had happened in that building in the preceding hours for the atmosphere to simply reset into something uncomplicated. But directional. Pointed toward something. The specific feeling that arrives in an organization when the addition of one player clarifies what the next several months are supposed to look like. Ohtani held his first pitching practice that same day. The timing was not coincidental. Nothing the Dodgers do in the management of Ohtani's 2-way schedule happens accidentally. Every bullpen session, every mound appearance, every decision about when he throws and how much and in what context is the product of deliberation that involves the medical staff and the pitching coaches and Roberts and Ohtani himself, whose understanding of his own body and its requirements has proven, across years of managing the unprecedented demands of his dual role, to be more accurate than almost any external assessment. He threw. In the specific, purposeful way that Ohtani throws when he is building toward something, not testing, not exploring, but constructing. The mechanics were clean. The velocity was present. And the expression on his face across the duration of the session was the expression of a man who had arrived at a point on his personal timeline that he had been working toward and was now confirming, pitch by pitch, that the work had held. The people watching from the edge of the field, coaches, staff, the handful of reporters allowed close enough to observe without disrupting, watched with the particular attention that Ohtani's pitching always commands. Not just because of what he is capable of producing on the mound when everything is working. But because of what it means, each time he takes that mound in practice, for everything the Dodgers are building toward. He is the axis. The roster decisions, the roster departures, the 5-year commitment made to a new pitcher on the same day 2 others were shown the door, all of it orbits around the question of what Shohei Ohtani looks like when October arrives and the margin for error disappears. That practice session was an answer. Not the final answer, those come later, in games that matter, in innings that cannot be taken back. But an answer that the people watching received with the quiet relief of confirmation. He was ready. Or close enough to ready that the distance remaining could be covered in the time available. The Dodgers closed that day having done more roster work in a single afternoon than most organizations accomplish in a month. 2 players gone. 1 player arrived. A jersey handed over with intention. A pitching practice that told the people who needed to know something that they needed to know. And somewhere in a clubhouse that had just been reshaped, that was different in composition and in atmosphere and in the specific direction it was pointed, the work continued. Because it always continues. Because the season does not pause for the drama that surrounds it or the decisions that reshape the roster or the behavior that forces organizational responses before anyone was ready to give them. The lineup would be posted tomorrow. The names on it would reflect everything that had happened today. And Ohtani's name would be on it. As it always is. As it will be when October arrives and the jersey numbers stop being introductory gestures and start being the names attached to the most important at-bats of the year. 5 years for Skubal. Number 29 in his hands. And Ohtani on the mound, building towards something that the Dodgers have spent an enormous amount of time and money and careful organizational energy trying to be ready for. The day had been heavy. The direction was clear. That was enough.